Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I want to talk about some risky NBA free agency signings. These are moves that, in my opinion, aren't necessarily bad and aren't necessarily guaranteed to fail, just that if they do go wrong, could have a massive negative impact on a certain team's ability to be really good over the next couple of seasons for any number of reasons, whether it be the age of the player, the contract they gave them, maybe injury history, or anything else. These are just risky moves in my opinion. So let's go ahead and get started. Now let's start with the Jimmy Butler sign and trade to the Miami Heat. And from Philadelphia's perspective, I really don't have an issue with this at all because apparently they offered him the full 5-year max to return to Philly, and he decided to turn it down because he just wanted to play in Miami that badly, and at the very least, they did get some value in return for him. So on that side, I really don't have a problem. My issue comes in on the Miami Heat side of this sign and trade. Because across this entire free agency class, the one guy that I felt like was a clear full max free agent that I just didn't really have a good feeling about was Jimmy Butler. For a combination of different reasons. He's going to be 30 years old by the time the season starts, and the Heat just signed him to a contract over 4 years that's going to be paying him over $35 million a year. Now, like I said, he is still, in my opinion, a no-brainer max contract player in this free agency class, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be worth that contract over the lifetime of the deal. Next season, yes, he's probably worth $35 million, but beyond that, I'm not so sure because at any point he could suffer a major injury, which is the case for any player across the league. But for Butler specifically, he's going to be more susceptible to those kinds of things as a result of just his physical style of play. And again, just some things that have happened to him throughout his career injury-wise, most specifically the knee injury that he suffered in Minnesota 2 years ago that he rushed back from is still a big concern for me. Not to mention that this is now the 4th different team that he has played for over the last 2.5 years, those being the Bulls, Timberwolves, Sixers, and now the Heat. And he's had issues with either the coaching staff or the front office or other players in every single spot prior to Miami. And that was another big concern for me in terms of which team was going to end up signing Jimmy Butler in free agency, how he would get along with the players and the coaching staff and the front office, because it's been shown that that is something that he is going to have an issue with at one point or another. But actually, I don't actually have that big of a concern about that anymore because he will be in Miami and their culture should be able to fight off a lot of that stuff and prevent a lot of the issues that Jimmy Butler's had in other places. But it still should be a concern and should still be on the minds of Heat fans, and is another reason that this, in my opinion, is just a bit of a risky move. And on top of all this, it's not just the fact that he's getting up there in age and this is a big contract and he's got some injury issues, could cause some team chemistry issues, but it's that they didn't just use cap space to outright sign Butler because they weren't able to do that. They signed and traded for him, so they also gave up value to get him. And the player most specifically, and most notably that they gave up in the deal was Josh Richardson. And this is a guy that's been in some Jimmy Butler trade rumors in the past from the Heat, going back even to when Butler was on the Timberwolves. And in my opinion, it would be really tough for me personally to want to give up Josh Richardson on his current contract for Jimmy Butler on the contract that he just signed. And I understand that the Heat, they had to make a move here. This was the only way they were going to get a max caliber player. And next year, Jimmy Butler is certainly going to be better than Josh Richardson. But beyond that, I'm not so sure. And certainly in terms of the value you're getting in return for the contract that those players are on, Richardson is on one of the best contracts across the entire league in terms of value compared to how good of a player he is. So it's a questionable move. It's a risky move to me to give up a player like Richardson that, again, in my opinion, is probably going to be better than Jimmy Butler in 2 or 3 years and is on a much cheaper contract. Now, like I said, I understand that this was the only way they were going to get a max player. They didn't have the cap space to bring anybody else in, and maybe this works out for them. Maybe Butler's really good for them and he has more longevity on this contract than I think he will, and they'll make other moves and they'll actually build up a pretty good team. Maybe all that actually happens, but in my opinion, when you combine his age, the contract, his injury issues, his past chemistry issues with other teams, and the fact that they gave up Josh Richardson to bring him in, all of this is very, very risky in my opinion. Next up now, we're again going to be talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, and I mentioned that I didn't have an issue with the Jimmy Butler trade from their perspective, and I actually thought they got back really good value in Josh Richardson for a player in Jimmy Butler that could have just left for nothing, but I do have an issue with the Al Horford signing. Now, if you were paying attention leading up to free agency, there were multiple reports that Al Horford felt comfortable walking away from the Celtics once he opted out of his deal because there was a team somewhere across the league that was going to pay him over $100 million across a 4-year span. And we couldn't really figure out who that team was. I thought it was Dallas. Some people thought it was the Kings. And maybe there were multiple teams, and Philly was just one of the teams that was willing to do that for him. But in the end, he ends up signing a 4-year, $109 million deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I have an issue with this on multiple levels. First, let's take context out of the equation. Let's not talk about how this relates to Philly. Let's just talk about the numbers here, because Al Horford is a 33-year-old big man that's going to be making over $27 million a year over the next 4 seasons. So when he's 36 and 37 years old, he's going to be making over $27 million a year for this Philadelphia 76ers team, and that just doesn't seem like good value. Even though I understand how important Al Horford was for the Boston Celtics over the last couple of years, specifically defensively, he did start to slip a little bit on that end, not a ton, but started to show some signs of age last year, and now the Sixers are going to be locked up to paying him a ton of money over the next 4 years and are hoping that he can continue to stave off the age decline defensively and offensively. So just from a money perspective, regardless of the team, I didn't feel like this was how much a team should have been paying over a 4-year span for Al Horford. Maybe a 2-year contract at 27 to 30 million would have made sense, but really it's the length combined with the value that just doesn't make sense to me. But then when you bring in the Philadelphia aspect of this, it still doesn't make sense to me. And I understand the points that some people are making that Joel Embiid is going to need kind of an insurance policy across the entire season, because they're going to need him in the postseason. They're going to need him fully healthy in the postseason. So having Al Horford allows them to have another big man, another high-quality player that they can play in place of Embiid on a couple of different nights, maybe 20 or so games throughout the season to keep Embiid fresh, to prevent him from getting hurt. And then even if he does get hurt, Horford should be able to pick up the slack. And I get all that. I just don't really understand spending this much money in free agency on a big man when you already have one of the best bigs in the league. With the way the NBA is now, it's so much more perimeter oriented. So it just doesn't make sense to be paying over $50 million to two big guys that, even though Horford can play the 4, the 5, and both these guys can kind of shoot, they're both pretty much 5 men at this point in their careers, at least in my opinion. So the fit it just doesn't make any sense here, especially for a Philadelphia team that, in my opinion, had so many other needs that they could have filled with this space. JJ Redick left in the offseason. They're going to have some issues with their spacing, especially when you look at their 5-man group that's going to start games with Ben Simmons and Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, and then Horford and Embiid. I understand that the two big guys can kind of shoot, and then Harris and Richardson should be at least okay floor spacers. They've really only got 2 above average guys in Richardson and Harris in terms of spacing the floor. And we know that Ben Simmons is a complete 0 in that area. So spacing is going to be an issue, not just in the starting unit, but up and down their entire lineup. And then again, we're going into next season with Philadelphia thinking that the Ben Simmons as our full-time point guard in the playoffs situation is going to work, even after they lost a guy that at times was their de facto point guard once they really got into their postseason run in Jimmy Butler in the offseason. And again, I don't have an issue with losing Butler. Maybe Richardson picks up some of the slack in that role that Butler started to fill last postseason, but it just would have made more sense to me if they had shored up their point guard rotation a little bit more with some of this money, so they're not going into next season again just counting on Ben Simmons and TJ McConnell to be able to hold that down specifically in the playoffs. But like I said in the intro, maybe this works out extremely well. It's not necessarily a bad move to me. It's just incredibly risky, because if it doesn't work out, then that's all of Philadelphia's cap space, especially after Ben Simmons signs his max extension. They're not going to have any flexibility now with the Horford signing to do anything else. And if it doesn't work out, then they're not going to be a championship caliber team with this group if Al Horford isn't playing well for them. So again, just a risky move for me. And last up now is one that really wasn't even a free agency signing. It was more so an extension, and it's Kristaps Porzingis going back to the Dallas Mavericks on a full 5-year rookie max extension. And this one is one across the entire video that I agree with more, and I agree was the right move more than anything else on this list. The Mavs traded for Kristaps Porzingis. They gave up pretty significant value like Dennis Smith and some future first-round picks, and took on some salary for the Knicks to be able to bring in Porzingis. And he's obviously an outstanding player in New York and someone that they wanted to keep around, as they should. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a risky move, because it's very possible that Porzingis just isn't the same after his injury once he comes back. He's also got some legal situations to sort out. We don't really know how that's going to go. And if he comes back and he just isn't the same kind of player that he was before the injury, and he's not worth what they're going to be paying him, it's going to have a huge negative impact on how they're going to be able to build this team around him and Luka Doncic moving forward. Like, if he's not an all-star caliber player, then it's pretty much just going to be Luka plus a borderline all-star guy in Porzingis and some other role players, and that could affect maybe Luka's desire to play in Dallas, maybe how much of a future he thinks they actually have, and when his contract comes up, maybe he doesn't want to be a Maverick anymore. Like, that's a realistic possibility here if the Porzingis thing doesn't work out. Now, again, the trade at the time absolutely made sense. This max contract absolutely makes sense right now because someone is going to pay him that, and they had to make this move. It's just, it doesn't mean that it doesn't still carry a ton of risk. And I would be a little bit nervous as a Mavs fan until I actually see Porzingis on the floor playing well for an entire season before I think, oh, this is a slam dunk home run signing. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.